Sean Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman, the Member for Strangford, and to follow all of the speakers in this very thoughtful and very well-considered debate today. And it was also a pleasure, Madam Deputy Speaker, to serve on the Public Bill Committee for this bill, and it's great to see so many members of that committee in the Chamber today. And if I may start actually by paying tribute to the clerks and the staff on that committee, as well as Honourable and Right Honourable members and colleagues across this House for the work and diligence and patience in taking part in that committee. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to focus my comments predominantly on new clause 1 of the bill introduced by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Member for East Ham, the Chair of the Select Committee, on which I also serve, and wish to pay tribute to him for the fantastic work he has done chairing that committee over the last 6 months. He's been absolutely fantastic and a very diligent and hard-working chair of the Select Committee. It goes without saying that, you know, when we look at and focusing this a bit on the scams point for a minute, scams often come from the fact that we don't have advice. And it's those people at the bottom end, not the bottom end, that's not the right word, but at those people at the what we class perhaps as the normal end of the market, who are most exposed by not having that advice and that accessibility to that advice. And I think we can all agree from the comments that have been made in the Chamber so far that we agree with the principle that everyone needs access to that advice. We need to ensure that people are informed as they go in to make these life-changing decisions. And we know the impact of not having that advice through the casework that we do, through the evidence as a member of the Select Committee that we've heard of people who have lost their savings, who have lost the money that they've accrued over years and years. And we know the importance of ensuring that's there. However, my question with this clause and what it seeks to achieve, which I do agree in principle with the underlying purpose of the clause, but I question whether this is the right place to do it within the primary legislation, because I think there is a place for this possibly within the secondary legislation, within the secondary regulations that will be needed as part of this process to ensure that people have access to correct advice. Now, I absolutely agree with the comments about PensionWise and the PensionWise service, and we've heard how fantastic that service has been, how well received it's been, how people have genuinely been impacted by their exposure and their access to the PensionWise service. And there's definitely a role for that to play. There's no doubt about that at all. We need to ensure, as I say, given that the figures that 72% of people who access that service change their decision, there's clearly an acceptance there that advice and the receipt of advice, you know, has got to be central to pension planning going forward. And as I say, when we look at things like scams and vulnerability for those people who need it the most, and these aren't the people with humongous pension pots who can fall back on, these aren't people with their above £30,000 pots they can transfer, these are ordinary working people that need this advice. They're people like in my constituency, people in places like Tipton and Wednesbury and Oldbury, you know, it's people that have worked for 40 years at various different organisations, 40 years at CLM Construction in Oldbury, for example, who have paid into a scheme, who now want to draw from that scheme. It's ordinary working people that rely on this advice. But what I would say is, I think, given the assurances from my honourable friend, Member for Hexham, the Minister, that when he looks at the secondary regulations, that he is taking a listening approach to this, and I'm sure in his summing up remarks he'll talk through that listening approach and what he means on that, not to give him a list of any more work he's got to do in his summing up remarks. He seems to have had quite an extensive one today. I feel as if it's there that perhaps the spirit of what this new clause is trying to achieve can really be brought to life, because I do agree with what many honourable and right members have said. I think there is a wider debate to be had here about how we ensure that people on what I would class as that ordinary end of the scale, haven't got humongous pension pots, but have worked hard for what they've got, get that advice. And the logistical challenges that my honourable friend, the member for North West Cambridgeshire, outlined in some of his intervention, I know he's not in place now because of social distancing, I think can be challenged effectively there, because this is an interesting proposition, and I do commend the Right Honourable Member for East Ham for the work that he's done on this, because I do think there is a place for this. But I think we need to have those debates within secondary regulations in order that we can really get into the nuts and bolts of how this operates and to how this works, so that we can get this right. And we also do have to remember, and I think this was picked up as well, there is an existing scheme regime there in terms of how the FCA operates, in terms of some of the guidance it sends out when you're 2 months from your 50th birthday, it sends out things like that. But that's not to say that's perfect. We know that's not perfect. We know that it isn't advice as we'd want to see it. It's a fact sheet that people are then left to interpret as they wish. It's not where we want to get to. And I think we agree with where we want to get to, the destination of getting there. It's just the mechanics of how we do that. So I think that from that perspective, I agree with the principle of the new clause, but I think there's a better place for it in terms of how we do this. And I absolutely commend the principle behind it, because at its core, fundamentally ensuring that people have access to the right advice to make informed decisions, to ensure they protect the money and the wealth they've built up through hard work is absolutely essential. Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may very quickly just also, I'm very conscious of time, just turn very quickly to Amendment 16 to Clause 124. My old friend for Grantham and Stamford, who I absolutely commend, by the way, for the work he has done on green finance and the green gilt work that he's done. I think he covered this so well that I think he's taken most of the points I wish to add. But I will just re-emphasise one point that he made around the unintentional consequences, particularly of divestment. I think many of the organisations that perhaps would be impacted by this are actually the organisations that we need to lead on these new green challenges. You know, we look at some of the part of my research, I looked at some of the organisations that we might think of as sort of ones that may need to be less divested from. We look at some of the oil companies like Shell, BP, Texaco, etc., and the work they've done, for example, Shell on biofuels, or BP on renewable energy in homes. Now, I declare no interest. I've got no saying that. You can Google it, you can see it, you can find it. But I think we run a real unintentional consequence here of actually going backwards and almost shooting ourselves a bit, because by divesting from those schemes, we inhibit the work that we need to solve this climate crisis. So, in concluding my remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think in relation to new clause 1, I think the principle of it is absolutely right, but I think there's more to be done on the mechanics, and I think the place for this is in the debate around the secondary regulations and making sure that we absolutely drill down into this. And I'm reassured by my honourable friend the Minister's reassurances on how he's going to approach that. And in respect to Amendment 16, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think there's some real unintended consequences that, if we're not careful, could actually take us backwards, not forwards. Thank you.
Angela Eagle.